People did bet on that 5,000 to 1 famously, but 5,000 to 1 winner, I think it's worth stressing again, was in betting terms the most unlikely single event to come to fruition in human history of any genre.
Welcome to season 2 of Football Uncovered. In season 1, we took you inside Blackburn and Leeds, Portsmouth and Liverpool, FIFA and a lot more. Heard about extraordinary stories from football chaos, cock-ups and outright corruption. This season, we're going inside 8 more Premier League clubs, as well as having 2 special episodes, one about life after the Premier League and one about the very future of club football at the highest level. I'm your host, Will Brazier, and with me every episode is Sporting Intel's Nick Harris. Nick, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Are you excited to spend about 10 to 12 more hours with myself?
I'm absolutely thrilled, particularly as I'm doing it, not in my kitchen like last time, but in my fancy new office.
Yeah, lovely. I'm sure we'll get into that in great detail. This season, we'll also be joined by a guest each week, usually a fan of the club we're talking about, or someone who has followed them closely and knows all the inside stories. As well as sharing all the usual inside stories from each club, we'll be looking, of course, at the owners of the club, how the current owners came to be, and where they've taken the club so far. This week, the featured club is Leicester City, miracle title winners in 2015-16. And joining Nick and I'm delighted to say we have James Sharpe. James, I'm so excited to talk about this.
You're not the only one. Thanks for having me on. When Nick asked if I would like to come on and talk about Leicester winning the title, I was like, how long have you got? So
the 11 players who played the most that season, the title winning 11, so we say. So we've got Schmeichel, Simpson, Morgan, Huth, Fuchs, Mahrez, Kante, Drinkwater, Albrighton, Okazaki, Vardy. Even now, listening to those 11 players, if you said these 11 players are going to win the Premier League title, it is just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, all of those players in a similar buying into that kind of essence of Leicester being a club that, and as a fan base that want to achieve more than what they've been told they can achieve. All of those players, you go through that list, and all of them have been told at some point that they aren't good enough. Schmeichel let go by Leeds because Ken Bates was selling anyone that he could get money for. But at the time, it was the message that was given out by Simon Grace, the manager, was that Schmeichel wasn't good enough. Danny Simpson at United, Robert Huth kind of let go by Chelsea and Stoke. Fuchs free transfer, Riyadh told that he was kind of too skinny. Albrighton let go by his club Villa on a free transfer, one of the best free transfers that the Premier League will ever have seen. And again, how he's not got an England cap, don't get me started on that. And Vardy, everyone knows Vardy's story of being let go. You go through that whole team and there are players there who had something to prove, and players who have been told that for whatever reason, Kante too small, that they couldn't do what they could, what they could, and they went and did it. And yeah, that team, for all Leicester fans, will be able to reel that team off the top of their head forever.
Yeah, 5,000 to 1, and people did bet on that 5,000 to 1 famously, but 5,000 to 1 winner, I think it's worth stressing again, was in betting terms the most unlikely single event to come to fruition in human history of any genre. As in, I remember when it happened, and I wrote a piece for the paper about it, when looking at the longest ever odds on anything. So no horse race in Britain in 300 years and 2.5 million races had ever produced a winner priced longer than 250 to 1, for example. In 1964, a man from Preston called David Threlfall bet £10 that the man would walk on the moon by the end of the decade. He got a price of 1,000 to 1, which came off. So that was one of the most unlikely things in human history. He bought himself a sports car, crashed it, and died actually with his winnings. So that's a salutary lesson. Goran winning Wimbledon on that extraordinary People's Monday in 2001, when he spent the fortnight talking about watching Teletubbies, came in as a wild card, 150 to 1. So that's not even 1/30th of as unlikely. Greece to win Euro 2004, 150 to 1 at the outside. Alien life to be confirmed by the end of any given year is, generally speaking, 100 to 1. So 42 to 1 Buster Douglas to beat Mike Tyson in 1990. So 5,000 to 1. I couldn't find anything remotely close to those odds of a bet being placed on anything ever. That's how unlikely it was.
One of the big reasons why it worked and at Leicester, and why they have been successful at Leicester, because they cared not only about their own culture, but they also cared about like what Leicester was as a city and as a community. And they bought, while they also asked Leicester to kind of buy into what they were about. We saw when the Thai king died, there was a minute's either silence or applause at Leicester's game.
Yeah.
People from the outside would look at it and go, "That's a bit weird," but it didn't really feel that. It didn't feel massively weird being like for that to happen, because Leicester would famously they'd have Thai monks come to the ground and bless either the ball or the players or whatever it was before games.
As you do.
Yeah, as you do, and as we've seen, clearly it works. Yeah, and yeah, so they're very big on culture, but they were also hugely keen on what Leicester was about, and they invested into what Leicester is as a city, and they invested in lots of the kind of surrounding area at Leicester and lots of charitable donations, and even the small things like buying like fans drinks and scarves and shirts and stuff. And it's all the kind of, it's the easy wins where someone as cynical as Nick would look at it and go, that's a bit of an easy win, that. Cynical. And it is an easy win. and it is an easy win, but
but it's good. It's good. It's where football clubs can do that simple stuff and show their fans that they're actually interested in the fact that, you know, they care about them. Maybe, you know, they give them a voucher for a pint or whatever, or a flag on the chair. You know, it's easy wins that so many football clubs fail to get right. Just small stuff that's relatively cheap that massively improves your sort of relationship with your supporters, which is obviously key.
Yeah, and Leicester's owners are brilliant at that and have shown that they do that. And that was one of the reasons why it's worked so well. And we even, when Vichai died, you saw like the huge outpouring of grief and also of tributes from Leicester fans, and like the big shots above the ground of just the flowers panning out.
Yeah,
you wouldn't get that if they'd not made a connection between themselves, even for owners who were so kind of silent, and so they stood back a lot and didn't do loads of media interviews at all, were quite kind of detached from the speaking part of it.
Yeah,
you don't have that outpouring if you don't make a connection, which is obviously what they did.
I think all three of us support clubs that have been through the ringer. You tell us what it was like as a Leicester fan in that whole period of not knowing if you'd survive or who was going to own you.
Yeah, it was really grim actually. And I remember, I know Alan Birchnell, the club ambassador, former player, really well, and he often talks about there were days where you would go into the training ground and people would just, on your way in, people would just be walking on their way out with cardboard boxes carrying all their stuff out, because they just didn't know where the next penny was coming from, and they didn't know what the future of the club was going to be. It was a really kind of grim, dark time, especially coming from the highs of where they'd been, and that, as you say, like an established Premier League club who were pretty well, you knew what you were getting every year from them. As you mentioned, that kind of the ITV Digital fiasco really kicked them and really, really affected them. Also, Peter Taylor being at the club he is not well liked by Leicester fans at all, mainly because he was oversaw the breaking up of that very good team, spent a lot of money on not very good players, and it all kind of crumbled under him.
Was he responsible for AD Akinbaye?
Yes. I think so.
That's enough said on Peter Taylor, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I've repressed most of that period of Leicester's history from my memory, alongside the relegation to League One. Yeah, it was, as you say, Nick, it was very difficult because you didn't know what the future of the club was going to be, and it really was a case of it may well not come through it.
So you were now covering the club. What was that like, getting back into the Premier League? What was
it
the
was amazing.
feeling?
Yeah, incredible, because Leicester have traditionally been a yo-yo club, and the up and downs, and fans were used to that. But for it to have been so long out of the top flight, and there'd been a lot had happened in between that, and it was almost like the club had rebuilt itself, and it had under Nigel Pearson. He'd done such an incredible job of having to go in after the Sven experiment had failed. It raised Leicester's profile massively, but there was a lot of problems there. So many players who are aging on inflated wages, and Pearson had to come in and both cut that down, change the mentality of the squad, change the culture of the club and of the team, and do it while also trying to get promoted. It felt like a lot of work had gone into it, and you'd seen the club and the team build to a point where they were ready to go. And the season before, you'd had the heartbreak of that playoff semi-final against Watford, where Leicester win the penalty, and you're a kick away from Wembley, and they miss it, and 20 seconds later, you're down the other end. Troy Deeney scores, and you're walking back to your car at Watford, knowing you've got another 46 games before you can ever hope of Premier League football again.
We mentioned a lot about foreign owners coming in and bringing in high-profile managers, not necessarily because of their CV, but because of the name. But did you think under Pearson they'd sort of changed their ways, and then all of a sudden you might be back to square one with Claudio Ranieri coming in?
Yes, because Leicester had found a way at the end of that season to play winning, attacking football. They changed formation. They'd gone to 3 at the back with wing backs, and I mean, no one knew who it was. I mean, we didn't know. The press had no kind of steers about it. The players didn't know. They were in Austria on a training camp, and they knew that something was happening. And then the next thing they know, a helicopter is landing, and they know their manager is about to get off it, and none of them know that it's Ranieri that's getting off that helicopter.
Oh my God!
That's like
Ranieri steps off the helicopter.
It's like X Factor or something. Here's your judge.
Yeah, so it was a big shock to everyone, and yeah, there was the concerns that is he really the bloke for it when he's just been sacked for losing to the Faroe Islands?